Hello, everyone. In today's lecture of Western political thinkers, we'll be focusing on Unit 3, J.S. Mill, precisely on his views on emancipation of women. As a part of this module, we shall be looking at the introduction, his basic outline or his basic views on emancipation of women, which shall then be followed by a brief critical evaluation of the same. By the end of the lecture, you should be able to understand and explain J.S. Mill's views on liberation of women in consonance with his book, Subjection of Women. You would be able to elaborate on his arguments and suggestions, which could help us to understand how he furthered the cause of gender equality. With his arguments and suggestions in place, we'll also be able to reflect on how far have we achieved gender equality in the current times. Moving on with the introduction, liberty and self-determination were basically the first two themes, were the basic two themes that figured predominantly in J.S. Mill's writing. So, freedom, he believed, that was the most precious and crucial issue for a human's well-being. Now, in this context, women, he goes on to say that women were the subjugated sex, denied access to their own potential, and they were subjected to the unquestioned prejudices and biases of the society. The Subjection of Women, the book that was jointly written by J.S. Mill and Harriet Taylor, therefore, goes on to make a strong claim for the equal status in three key areas. First one was the women's right to vote. The second one was the right to equal opportunities and education, followed by the right to equal opportunities and employment. Equality as a legal right between the sexes was Mill's main concern. He referred to women as both the subject and the enslaved class, for their position was worse than that of the slaves. The parallel between women and slaves was used to depict the reality of 19th century England, where, on marriage, the woman became subservient to the husband both in physical being and property. Mill pointed out that the opposition to sexual equality was not based just on reason. To dismiss equality of the sexes as a mere theoretical proposition, as it did not lend any credibility to the argument that women were weaker and hence subordinate. He agreed that the majority opinion favored inequality, but this, he contended, was going against the reason. So he goes on to point out that the subordination of women was only due to the fact that they were physically not as strong as men. Mill goes on to point out that the rule of men over women was not entirely and altogether based on force. So, here in a way, he's trying to also tell us that women are also accepting it voluntarily without any complaint and becoming a consenting party to this subordination. Now, though his view is quite wrong to suggest that the rule of men over women is based on the consent of women, because many women during that point of time were also lodging quite a lot of protests against the rules in their own writings. So, though it was an initial phase, but still the consent was not entirely the women. Women from childhood were taught to be submissive, yielding, and accommodating rather than become independent with self will and self control. They were taught to live for others, their husbands, and children. Selfless devotion was considered to be the best feminine trait, the glory of womanhood. It was considered as the best trait that the woman could have at that time. He believed that a society in which half the reservoir of its talent remains suppressed or unutilized, it could hardly ever reach its full potential of progress. He also goes on to articulate and defend the right of women to be considered as free rational beings capable of choosing the life they would like to lead for themselves, rather than being dictated by what the society thought they should be doing or they should be doing. Mill was confident that women, even if granted freedom and opportunities, would not fail to perform their traditional functions. As a member of the English Parliament, he also goes on to support a married women's property bill, wherein he also contended that England had to move beyond the savage state where marriage was based on the idea that one had to have absolute power over the other. Women in those times, in that British time, was denied by law the right to her children and property. Hence, it was necessary on his part to assert that they must have the rights to property, inheritance, and custody. Mill goes on to plead that hence he feels that the equality of the sexes before the law, for that was something very crucial to ensure a just arrangement between the two sexes. This he felt would be beneficial to the larger society. Mill also points out that if women were allowed to exercise their faculties freely and fully, the real beneficiary would be the society, for it would be able to draw from the larger pool of mental resources. He understood that the important point that equal opportunities in education meant that equal opportunities in employment would also be made available. In granting the right to vote, Mill hoped that women themselves then would be able to bring about a legislation to basically remedy the domestic violence. Following which, he goes on to object that women being prevented by law to compete and contribute to the society is again a hindrance to the entire human progress. He desired that the subjection of women should not be ended by law, or merely it could not just be ended by law, but rather you needed a change in education, you needed a change in opinion, habits, and finally a change in the family life itself. To conclude this lecture, his theory faced certain objections from the women, taking forward the feminist movements from the other parts of the globe. Now he goes on to accept the traditional role of women. Like we saw, that he says that even if the women are given opportunities, they'll be able to manage their traditional roles, which goes on to say, or which goes on to assert in the fact that he is agreeing or he is accepting the traditional role of women. This entire proposition was seen harshly by his contemporary feminist critics. He accepts that women have a choice of wage earning, but he also asserts that the household management and bringing up family are their main prime duty. His refusal to question the traditional roles of the traditional family and its demands on women were basically setting limits on his idea of liberal feminism. His idea of equality and liberty of women was seen by the critics as benefiting these societal interests, as it was also catering to the class bias which was there. Because these certain rules and regulations or these certain ideology that he was coming up with was for some reason or the other only focused on the middle and the upper class women. Hence, Mill's idea of liberal feminism was seen as an inadequate vehicle for women's liberation from traditional roles and the institutionalized patriarchy. For any further reference, you can refer to Sushila Ramaswamy and Subrata Mukherjee's A History of Political Thought, Plato to Marx, or else you could also refer to Shefali Jha, Western Political Thought from Plato to Marx. Thank you.